Good morning. It is February 5th in Senate Judiciary. We have Todd Delos from the Attorney General's office to give us a update on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission report. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, as Chair said, Todd Delos, Assistant Attorney General, Director of Policy for Attorney General Sherry Clark. Also, I believe online is Assistant Attorney General Brown Hansen, who chairs the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission. So this is a commission, by way of background, a commission that is legislatively created. It's a group of 17 members that stretch across law enforcement, the support and advocacy community for survivors of domestic violence, and individuals in our Public Human Services Agency. Those folks take time multiple times a year to look at various fatalities that may be domestic violence related. And out of those fatalities, do a review of what the circumstances are and then develop a series of recommendations that are put forward to the legislature or through to other policymakers. This is a major area of focus for the Attorney General's office. I think this committee is probably well aware that domestic violence remains one of the most frequently occurring crimes across the state. And certainly looking at these most impactful outcomes provides good information for policymakers to determine what the next steps are. So I'm happy to walk through some of the figures and facts in the report. I think it is an extremely important part of the public safety portfolio, which I know is a focus. And I guess I would start just in terms of the facts and figures in the report, looking at some of the data on pages 5 and 6, which really start talking about percentages of homicides in Vermont that are domestic fatality related. Figure 2 is just giving you roughly the percentages every year. So this year of the 29 fatalities, and sorry, I should be really clear. This year, in this case, is 2023. So there is a lag between when the information is available from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner and when the Commission looks at that information. And the Attorney General is here, so let me turn over to her because she's going to be a better speaker on this point.
That I can't be there in person, and I'm sorry that I'm late. I had this done at 9:30 instead of 9, but here you are. So apologies for that. I wanted to begin, and I'm not sure how much Todd has said, but I want to begin by providing a little background on what this commission is and how it came to be. Is that helpful? Are you aware of why this exists? So in 2002, the legislature created this commission. It's a group of 17 stakeholders of anyone you can think of who would relate to this issue of fatalities and domestic violence. It was assigned sort of to be housed in my office. The Attorney General is the chair of the commission for many years. The Attorney General has never been the actual chair of the commission. It's assigned to an Assistant Attorney General. For many years, that person has been Carolyn Hansen, who has done a fabulous job and also is on Zoom to answer any questions that I cannot. When I arrived in 2023 as the Attorney General, having worked in the office at that point for 8 years, I had wanted to prioritize the work of this commission. And the reason why is because I felt like it wasn't getting enough attention. By the statute, the commission is required to provide its report and recommendations to the legislature, the judiciary, and the governor's office. And it seemed to me like it needed to just have a spotlight because the legislature wanted this commission so that we could make progress on addressing the issue of domestic violence. And this isn't the only commission or task force that we have that evaluates issues and then provides recommendations and reflections and identifies trends. So it's a really good model and can be very, I think, effective at identifying the issues that need to move ahead because it's the commission that has pretty much all of the major stakeholders, it is also effective at getting a group of people to kind of come together and present to you an idea that is somewhat pre-baked. And I think therefore it makes really good use of the legislature's time, because all of the stakeholders have already had conversations and aired out a lot of the issues, most of the issues that might be identified with respect to some of the recommendations. So with that, I one more note. How does this work? How do we identify what are the fatalities that relate to domestic violence? The way it works is that the medical examiner's office actually gives the information to us on a yearly basis, based on their own evaluation of what homicides are relating, of all the homicides. And of course, usually they've identified this as a homicide, but there hasn't been a case that has come to fruition. So that's something to consider. But the task force itself, the commission itself, identifies which of these relate to domestic violence. Sometimes when I arrived and started looking more closely at this, I had wrongfully assumed that fatalities related to domestic violence referred to the victim dying. But every year, pretty much, we see it's not just the victim. It might be someone coming to that person's aid. It might be the abuser themselves in a murder-suicide, or because someone, law enforcement official has had to turn a deadly weapon on them because to save someone. So these are complicated issues. So when we talk about deaths relating to domestic violence, it's not just the person you traditionally think of as being that survivor, that victim of domestic violence. It's all the other players, which really highlights how widespread the problem is. It's of domestic violence. So that's something to consider when you look through these. And it's particularly important this year because some of our recommendations relate to that idea that not the traditional victim, not only the traditional victim could be a fatality related to domestic violence. I know Todd, it sounds like, was giving some updates about the homicides. This year, which meaning 2023, the year that was analyzed, there were a lot of homicides and them related to domestic violence. And that tends to be the number that we often will see relate to domestic violence. So it's around, 7, 10, somewhere in there. So that had stayed the same, although the total number did get bigger. And therefore, the total percentage of homicides related to domestic violence was smaller than it is. But over time, since this commission was created, it's over 40%. It's hovering near 50%. So in my mind, if we can address this issue meaningfully and reduce that number, we have reduced the homicide rate in Vermont. So that's another reason why, as the chief public safety prosecutor focused on this issue is so important to me, because I know if we can address it meaningfully, we can reduce that overall number and save lives. I would be remiss if I didn't note the progress that was made in 2023. The statute requires the commission to provide a report and recommendations every other year. We actually review every year and we provide a report every year, but it's every other year by statute. And so I'm going to highlight the work that we had presented in 2023. That was an incredibly impactful year. Virtually every single recommendation that the commission made, whether it affected the legislature or another body in state government, was adopted or made into law. So a hearty thank you to this committee, the legislature as a whole, and many of the stakeholders who worked so hard to make that a reality. And we are really hoping to come this year and have the same kind of success rate. And with that, I want to highlight a few of the recommendations. The first relates to firearms. Probably not surprising to this committee, firearms play a critical role, not just in fatalities, but also in coercion, control, and threatening behaviors. And not surprisingly, the existence of a firearm in a home dramatically increases the lethality potential in that domestic violence situation. So we have, and Carolyn has worked tirelessly on this issue related to firearms, whether it be safe storage or other issues. This access to firearms recommendation asks the legislature to take a deeper look. And we know what a deeper look means in the legislature. It means some sort of a working group study committee. And this would focus on the issue of compliance with firearm surrender when there is a relief from abuse order. So in that context, how can we do a better job of making sure that the guns are not in the wrong hands? Our vision would be, this was a study committee that again would have various stakeholders, law enforcement leaders, representatives from the judiciary who play a critical role, the Department of Corrections, family law practitioners who are experts in this industry, advocates, prosecutors, and so on. So that's recommendation number one. Number two relates to victim services positions. I know that you all know a ton about victim services positions. I don't think the general public does, but understand that, as I mentioned, there are deaths related to domestic violence that involve the perpetrator of the domestic violence is dead. And for that reason, there is no charge brought. No one's going to charge a dead person with a crime. And so the usual victim services support that's offered to victims isn't there in the same fashion. And that is something that deprives those victims of the same support and services and healing that's offered in when there is a charge that is brought. So this vision involves more victim support personnel placed within local law enforcement. And the suggestion is that 2 regional victim services position be created to work with the agencies like the network in providing those services, particularly when there is a murder-suicide case where there is no charge. Recommendation number 3 is an option to impose what's called accountability programming in the final relief from abuse order. Something that's very frustrating for all of us, but I think particularly for people who don't know as much about domestic violence, is that often the survivor goes back to the perpetrator. And it can be very frustrating, but it's a very complicated landscape, as we know. One of the effective tools of rehabilitating that offender is restorative justice principles and using this accountability programming. So the goal, knowing how effective that can be in keeping someone safe and rehabilitating the offender and having them take responsibility for their actions, is to amend the existing law on this accountability programming to give courts the explicit authority to impose a condition that the respondent engage in domestic violence accountability programming when the final relief from abuse order is granted. So, and the statute, I think, is referenced in the report, but just for the record, it's 15 VSA 1103. Number 4, I'm almost done, is to expand the use of what's called lethality assessment so that it's statewide. Lethality assessment is just what it sounds like. It is a way to acknowledge that a key element of keeping people safe is to understand what the lethality is, and we can do better on this issue. The idea is that after a offender, an individual is screened with the tool, they are connected to local domestic violence resources and community supports. There are Vermont State Police who are using this tool, and I think that is wonderful, but it would be great if the legislature could provide that kind of meaningful support so that there is statewide use of lethality assessment tools and every response to a domestic violence incident. So we would advocate that there would be some work with the network against domestic and sexual violence, with the Criminal Justice Council, so that we can make sure that the lethality assessment protocol tools is being used statewide in a more robust fashion. There are other recommendations in this report that are worthwhile and meaningful. Those are the 4 that I wanted to highlight today. As you can, I know you have copies of the report there, and as you can see, it's, I think, very, very well laid out. It follows the same, it's looked very much the same for years, but it kind of identifies the problem, and then it has recommendations at the end. So those are very, very straightforward. I would urge you to prioritize these recommendations. I think this is a incredible resource to support the legislature in working on public safety. So many different people, and there's a list in the report of all of the members of the commission, but we have a judge, law enforcement, prosecutors, domestic violence survivor, domestic violence specialists. So having that team of people review the fatalities, identify the opportunities for improvement, and then be able to present them to you is really a gift to public safety in the state. So I would just be happy to answer questions, but I would also, encourage, I'm sure that you're going to be meeting with others too, but happy to be here to support the work now and throughout the rest of the session.
Committee, any questions?
I have one. Good morning.
Morning.
On page 6, where we're looking at the causes of death, where we list the number of deaths, which is important. Are the numbers just of the victims here, or in the case of a murder suicide, is that number also included in these final numbers?
Yes, there were 7 domestic violence related homicides. So those are the 7 that we looked at. Oh, you mean the figure?
The figure, if it was a murder suicide, is the suicide contained in these numbers that we're looking at as far as arriving at 7?
Yes, I believe it is, but Carolyn, can you correct me if I'm wrong?
Good morning. Those numbers are of homicides, domestic violence related homicides. We would only count the person who was the victim of a homicide.
Okay.
We do track that when the perpetrator takes their own life, but we don't count that as a homicide.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great question. Thanks, Carolyn.
Any other questions? Yeah. Todd, do you have anything you want to add, or Carolyn?
The only thing I would say, the House recently passed a bill expanding the members of the commission. That's something the commission asked for last year. That will likely be coming from the Senate at some point. And then there are two of the recommendations the AG we anticipate being taken up in the coming weeks. That's related to the use of the accountability programming and final order, and the creation of a study commission about requirements and access. So both of those we hope will get through the House of Representatives.
Senator Hoskin.
I do actually have a question, and I understand if you don't know the answer, but I believe a year or maybe even 2 years ago, we expanded restorative justice access for domestic and sexual violence. Where is that at? What's the status of that? And if it's still in sort of development phase, my next question will be irrelevant, which is what impact has it had?
It's really still, and I mean, it's not in the development phase. So first, the various nonprofits who are the community justice centers created MOUs, and we can have Willa, if you want, we can have Willa Farrell come in and give you like a status update. So I actually haven't had a status update recently, but I know it's too soon to really see what the impact would be. However, that policy change was made after a pilot program in White River Junction had taken place in 2021, 2022. And that had, based on that, the recommendation to go statewide was made. And so there is data. It's an extremely small set of folks who were engaged in that pilot program, but there was that was sort of a springboard to make, to amplify and go statewide. But Senator Vyhovsky, I'd be happy to connect you with Willa Farrell, or we can come back, or I can just even write you an email if that's the easiest thing, just to give you an update on that. Would you like that?
Yeah, no, I would definitely like an update. I really always want to be thinking sort of holistically about the many different ways we can be navigating these issues. And to your point, as a clinician myself, I certainly understand the cycle of violence that can cause people to go back again and again and again. So I think, the restorative justice approach can, as well as creating this accountability in the final orders, can be really important to keeping people safe.
Yep. I thought you were going to like that. I'm glad I'm right.
Just out of curiosity, what were the, I think, was it the two additional, members on the commission what were they?
Do you have those? Agent
I
Clerk?
don't have them. Carolyn can help us out. We're phoning a friend.
Hi. The additional ask was for a state's attorney victim advocate. We don't currently have one, so that's a non-confidential advocate that works in the prosecutor's office. And we also asked for a sheriff because we have a local law enforcement representative, a municipal chief, who is Chief Sean Burke, I'm sure you all are familiar with, who's fantastic. And we also have Major Lone from the state police. But because the legislature has asked the sheriff's departments to assist with things like standbys, which is when somebody needs to remove belongings from a household and there is an order that allows them to go and get belongings, and we want to keep people safe in that situation. We have sheriffs that assist with that. So because they play a role in helping to prevent domestic violence, we wanted to make sure that they had a seat at the table.
And PCCDS, right, Carolyn?
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear the
So
question.
the Center for Crime Victim Services is also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, and that was a suggestion actually from House Judiciary, was to add someone from the Center for Crime Victim Services, and they indicated that they do have the capacity to be part of the commission, so we would welcome them as well.
The other highlight there, again, based on the commission's request, is to examine near fatalities, so that we're not only looking at sort of worst case scenarios, but we're also looking at significant bodily harm in that. And that's something that the commission will work on putting together in years if the bill passes. So.
We also asked to just solidify the fact that we've got a victim services director at the Department of Corrections and also at the state police, and we wanted them to have their own seats at the table, so we added them, but they are actually already there as alternates, but we wanted that to be official. So those are the requests in the bill.
And that's H27.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any further questions or discussion? Well, thank you. We've got plenty of time, and I don't want to, I do have another question for another area. Don't want to put you on the spot, and if you're not prepared to discuss it today, I understand, but I understand there might be a request from your office for an additional position. And since we got, 45 minutes till our next guest, I was wondering if that might be something you want to address now and raise with the committee, or if you're not prepared, we could come back another time. But just wanted to throw out here.
We are actually asking for more than one position. Can you be more specific in what area you're curious about?
What was that?
The one we discussed.
Yes, yeah, the one, yeah.
The appellate position.
Oh, so we of course had previewed this for the administration as well, that if, based on the first time Donald Trump was president, we had to involve ourselves in many national lawsuits, and it took up a lot of time and attention and work from the office. And so I was previewing that might happen again. This, I think, is actually much worse. The current president has, there's no nice way to say this. I'll just quote the judge. The federal judge, the first lawsuit that we had to bring in response to an unconstitutional and illegal act by President Trump, the federal judge who had been appointed by Ronald Reagan said in his 40 years of being on the federal bench, he'd never seen anything more unconstitutional. So they're pretty flagrant violations at this rate. So far, 2 weeks in, we've had to sue twice. The appellate unit who handles this work in my office has two lawyers, the Solicitor General, the Deputy Solicitor General. They are literally working night and day around the clock on the weekends. And it would be an investment in the office to make sure that we had enough people to do all of the normal appellate work that we do, which is handling the appeals cases for the state and supporting lawyers who have to go on appeal. We only have the two lawyers. California is involved in the same number of those cases, and they have 1,000 appellate lawyers, and we have two. It's it's very difficult to do the work without that support, both the regular job work and then all of this new work that's been created by the unconstitutional actions taken by our president. And, I think that it's an investment in the people to make sure that they're not so overworked they leave us. As a manager, I would be remiss if I didn't try to create a more livable schedule for them. I'm getting texts from them at 6 a.m. We're constantly working on the weekends so far. This is what I anticipated, frankly. So it's not like a super shock. We didn't put it in the budget actually for the administration because I said we're not sure who's going to win. And there was no indication that the candidate who lost was going to require this level of lift for our office, but the president has certainly required a heavy lift for us. So that is that position to ensure that we can do the work that's required of the appellate unit at this time.
Do you have any information about how staffing levels have changed from when your office experienced the first administration compared to now? Is there less staffing, more staffing, or is it about the same?
If I'm remembering correctly, we have the same number of staffing, roughly the same, maybe give or take 1 or 2 positions. We have 100 lawyers, maybe it's 99 lawyers or 100, including me, maybe. And I think that's the same, but I can get that information. I wasn't prepared to talk about this today, so I don't have any data, but I can get more information, and we certainly will have that when we present to the Appropriations Committee as well.
Any questions? Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Just wanted to get the highlight on that incoming ask, and I figured since we had a lot of extra time, we could just get some initial information. So if there's nothing further, we can adjourn for now.
To the extent that it's useful, I would just add that we have received, I would say, an overwhelming response from people. These past 2 weeks, constituents have reached out to whatever email address they can find. So I sometimes get them on my campaign email. Sometimes I get them out at the office, just providing supportive feedback on, I can get you the statistics, but we've received dozens and dozens, I'm sure it's approaching 100 at this point, emails from people saying, thank you for your work. So I pass this on to our appellate unit who's working so hard. And I just wanted to reflect that so that you could see that the constituents we serve are very enthusiastic about the work that we're doing to fight the unconstitutional and illegal actions of the Trump administration.
Thank you. Okay. Halo, could you please see if Jeff Wallen or Tucker Jones could come in and